A faithful friend. My father was very sick with a disease called Parkinson's disease. My mother died earlier than my father, and I tried to take care of him, but couldn't. The disease makes a person more and more sick and more helpless each day. And finally, I had to place my father in a convalescent home and then in a hospital. In those days, there was just no way to treat this illness except with medicines that didn't work very well. My father was in this hospital for over 5 years. During that time, I tried to tell my father about God's love because he didn't really know God. My grandparents had been Buddhists and worshipped ancestors, but my father didn't seem to believe in very much at all. Well, maybe he believed in hard work and he believed in saving money, but nothing much more than that. But my father wouldn't listen to me when I talked to him. After all, I was the son and he was the father. My opinions were not very important to him. One day, during the early part of his stay in this hospital, a friend of my father's came to visit him. The friend's name was James. James had been my father's childhood friend. They grew up together. And James was very poor and old himself and somewhat sick, but he came faithfully to see my father. He had to travel a long way by bus, but he always came. Some days he came with a few pieces of sweets for my father. Sometimes he would come with a fruit. However, my father, he was a very suspicious man. "What does James want from me?" my father asked. He must want my money." "But father, you don't have any money to give him," I replied. "Oh, yes, that's true," said my father, as if suddenly remembering. "But there must be something he wants from me. He keeps coming to visit me and bringing me nice things." You see, we Asians aren't very good at receiving gifts from anyone. We always expect to give something back in return, and nothing is given very freely. Well, that went on for many years. Sometimes he would clip his fingernails. Sometimes he would shave my father. Sometimes he would take his dirty laundry home and bring it back fresh and clean. And sometimes they just sat, and James would tell stories about their childhood, and they would laugh together about the silly things they did when they were children. Then about the 5th year that my father had been in the hospital, on one of my visits, I saw a very big Bible on my father's bed. "Father, what is that?" I asked. "What do you think it is?" he answered angrily. "I thought you were a Christian. Don't you know the Bible? James gave it to me." "Well, of course I know the Bible," I answered. "So, what are you reading in it?" "I'm going to read the whole Bible," my father said. And so he started to read the Bible that his faithful friend had given to him. Well, my father got to the book of Leviticus, and then he got stuck. Now, if you ever read the Bible, you'll see that Leviticus is definitely not the most interesting book in the Bible. I suggested to him that he read the book of John the Apostle or Luke the doctor, but my father was a stubborn man. He just wanted to start at the very beginning and finish the whole Bible. But unfortunately, he got stuck in the book of Leviticus, and whenever he tried to read it, he just fell asleep. Then one day, I went to visit him, and there was a very big picture of Jesus above his head. "Father," I said, "what is that?" "Don't you know Jesus?" he asked, annoyed with me as usual. "Well, of course, I know Jesus," I answered, "but why do you have his picture above your bed?" "Because James gave it to me," was all my father would say, and that seemed to explain it all. Anything James did was fine, and everything I did seemed wrong. Then one day, in the 6th year of James's visits, James called me on the telephone. And he said to me, "You must come to church this Sunday," he said to me, "because your father has come to know God, and your father is going to be baptized." So I went to church that day, and my father was baptized. 1 week later, my father died. And a little over 2 weeks later, after my father died, James also died. James had finished his job on this earth. And as I've been in many nations, I've never found another man with such great love as James. He cared and cared so much for my father, and it was love that changed my father's life for eternity. James's love was faithful. His precious love was in doing small things, but it was small things done with so much love that finally turned my father's heart towards God's love.